you have not read me before, this is my 19th novel, and it is my first novel with William Morrow, and I am very excited. I was really very excited from the moment I saw the cover, which I absolutely love, partly because it has two Cavalier King Charles Spaniels on it, and I have a Cavalier, and she thinks she's actually, like, the book is about her, and I don't have the heart to tell her it's not. What the book is about, as you know, the title, The Restoration of Celia Fairchild, gives you some pretty good clues about what's going on inside the story. So Celia Fairchild is a syndicated advice columnist known as Dear Calpurnia. And when the book opens, she is kind of having a rough time. She is just coming out of a divorce. She was not married a very long time, but it was not good almost from the get-go. In fact, her husband there were a lot of red flags. He had 5 affairs in 3 years, the first with the justice of the peace who married them. So it was not good, and she should have known better. And in fact, deep in her heart, she probably did. But the thing is that Celia really, really, really wants a family. And she felt like this might be her last chance to make that happen. Well, it has not worked out. And so she's trying to figure out how to go on with her life. And in the very first chapter, something will happen, and Celia suddenly has the opportunity, she hopes, to perhaps be able to adopt a baby. She's not the only one being considered for this child, but she's one of them, and she is very excited. And, you know, I kind of tapped into a lot of my own experience for this book, perhaps more than I have in other places. Because I remember when I found out that I was pregnant for the first time. Now, I had wanted a baby. My husband and I were trying for a baby, but there's a different thing than you like have a theoretical baby than when someone tells you you are going to have a baby. There's a moment of panic that comes after that. At least there was for me. And I, suddenly had this feeling that, oh my gosh, is this a good idea? I know what a train wreck I am. And like, who would think that I should be in charge of an entire human being? Is this going to work out? So Celia is excited, but she's also a little panicked, and she decides that in fact she needs to transform herself entirely into a better person, into ideal parenting material. Well, that's not really true. What Celia really, really needs is restoration, personal restoration. And that's what this book is about. I've had so many people tell me that this is the right book for this time. And I think that's true. Was there ever a time when we were more in need of restoration? I think now is it. But I would posit that restoration is the business of our lives, if you think about it. When a child is born, they're pretty much perfect. They're happy. Assuming they're healthy, they're happy, they're confident. The possibilities are endless. And of course, we as parents or grandparents or the people around them, aunts, uncles, nieces, or aunts and uncles, friends, family, we try to support that child and we try to protect it. But the truth is, you don't get to be very old before you start getting some bumps and bruises, disappointments. We get hurt, we get betrayed. We are disappointed in all kinds of ways, and perhaps we become fearful and we lose some of that confidence that we have. So what we do is we pull back and we protect ourselves in all kinds of ways. And that's just humanity. That's growing up. But I really believe that part of our business in life is to try and get back to that best version of ourselves. So that's what's going to happen to Celia. I don't like to give spoilers. So really, if you haven't read the book, I need you to read the book, and you should probably get it here from Hub City because they're great. And you should support your local bookstore. It's the right thing to do. So Celia is going to end up through a series of events going back to the place she left as a child, Charleston, South Carolina. Now, if you've been to Charleston, and chances are, if you live around here, you are well aware that Charleston is at the forefront of the historical restoration movement, which is why it's such an incredible city to visit. Charleston is the place that really values its history, and they do a wonderful job with taking those old, fabulous buildings, and they don't tear them down. they restore them. They bring them back to their former glory, and maybe even better than their former glory ever was. Well, so that's kind of a metaphor in this book for Celia's journey. She has to be restored. But to do that, she's going to have to really examine her own history. And that's something she's been running from for a long, long time. So that is certainly a factor in the book. Another thing that's kind of interesting is Celia is going to, in fact, be inheriting a house from her Aunt Calpurnia. And that's the aunt she loved very much. And she gave herself that pen name, Dear Calpurnia, when she started her advice column. So that is her job. And so when she goes to Aunt Calpurnia's house, she's going to find out, in fact, that Aunt Calpurnia had become a hoarder. Well, I loved this idea. I had been reading some books about hoarding when I started working on this book, and I found out some fascinating things. That hoarding wasn't necessarily what I had thought that it was. I thought hoarding was always about people who had perhaps had a lack of abundance in childhood. And the only way they felt safe was by gathering more things to them. And certainly that can be a factor. But there's other factors in there too. And one of them that was fascinating to me was the idea that hoarders very often just have trouble making decisions. Hoarders very frequently are always cleaning out their stuff, and yet they never manage to get rid of any of it because they just can't decide. And so in the absence of making a decision, of course, the decision is they keep it. Well, there's one little, I'm not going to read a lot to you from the book tonight, but Celia is having to go through some of these things and decide what to keep and what to throw away. And as she's trying to do this very difficult thing, a friend of hers advises her. And this is one of her new neighbors, Heath. He said, think of this house as a museum, he said, and you as the curator. If a stranger walked through the door, what would you want them to know about your family before they left? Keep only the objects that tell your story and tell it well. So that's, I think, pretty good advice for life, right? Because if we try to hold on to everything in our past, we will be so weighted down that we will not be able to take a step forward. So that's part of what Celia is having to do. Now, another thing that I love about Celia is the fact that she is, in fact, an advice columnist. I don't know about you, I love reading advice columns. And I figured out one day why it is that I love them. So, I try my best to do my best, but the truth is there are times when my life feels like a great big mess and I just feel like I'm a mess and I'm a train wreck. But when I read an advice column, I'll read the letters from the people who write in. I think, okay, well, I am a train wreck, but I'm not as much of a train wreck as that guy. So I think it's sort of a self-actualization kind of, I just feel better about myself. And I am fascinated by advice columnists because, these people who write them seem to have all the answers. They're so wise and so clever. But I started to think, are they really? Does anybody really have all the answers? And it made me wonder about their personal lives. And so I loved the idea of an advice columnist who is incredibly insightful about other people's problems, but really clueless about her own issues. And that's our girl, Celia. And that's what makes me love her so much, because I can relate to that. I don't know about the rest of you, but I give incredible advice. I'm amazing. If you have a problem later, call me up. We'll sit down, and in 5 minutes, I will have a 5-point plan to how to make your life perfect. But then I'd have to look at you and say, okay, now you do me, because I got no clue about me. This is why I have friends and family, and we need that. And that's another big component of this book, the importance of community. And that's something that has run through my books all along. And again, was there ever a year when we learned so much how much we need each other? I think that's part of why so many people are writing and saying, this is the book we need right now, because we do need our community. And I hope if there's something good that comes out of all of this, and I imagine there will be some things, it's that we learn for once and for all how much we need each other and how much we should be valuing each other. So something that Celia is doing, so she's going back to Charleston. She's trying to get this baby. And, part of her restoration is, as I said, examining her history, going back through the things that were painful, embracing the whole of it, deciding what she's going to keep and what she's going to discard. Not that she's going to forget the things that have happened, but there's a point at which you can kind of release some of the pain of your life and hopefully move forward. So that's what we want to see her do. But she's also at a point where in her career, she had kind of wondered, is she really, is she sort of just repeating herself? Is she really kind of being all that she can be? But it's very hard to just walk away from great success. So this is a time when Celia is also experiencing a creative restoration. If you read my books at all, you know that I am a dedicated crafter. I never met a fiber art I didn't love. I quilt a lot, I knit a lot, I crochet a bit, I embroider, I play the piano, I write, I paint, and I do most of these things quite badly. I want to be clear about that. But all of those secondary art forms inform my primary art form, which of course is writing. And so I am a really huge believer in the power and importance of creativity and what it does for us. And so Celia is going to kind of go over her creative renaissance as she meets some people who are involved in all kinds of different fiber crafts. Now, I want to be clear, if you've never read my books, if you've never threaded a needle and don't want to, if you've never knitted a stitch, it doesn't matter. I use this as a way to get a very diverse cast of characters who would probably never have been friends into the room in a way that, quite frankly, doesn't feel, well, stupid. This makes sense, these characters are here. It makes sense that they could be together. But another thing that she starts doing, and which very much tapped into my own kind of an experience, is, once she thinks, well, maybe I'm going to have this child, she starts being a little panicked, of course, about, gosh, am I going to be a good parent? Will it? And then you start thinking about your, as I call them, your maybe baby. She's thinking about her maybe baby and like, well, what would I want to pass on to this child? What would I want them to know? I think every parent has gone through that at some time. I have so often wished that my children would listen to the mistakes I have made so they could avoid them. It has been my experience that children never do this. However, most of us, reality is, as human beings, we should read the book, but a lot of us insist on taking the field trip. And I think that's normal. Yet Celia tries to do this. And so she starts writing letters to her maybe baby, kind of trying to pass on some of the lessons that she has learned in life, some of the things she hopes her possible child will love or avoid, but somehow in the process, Celia really discovers that she is writing to herself as well. And I just want to read you a very short little snippet from one of the letters she is writing. She calls this baby she doesn't know Peaches. So she says, "Dear Peaches, I keep thinking about the inscription on my parents' grave. Until the times of restoration of all things whereof God spake. Maybe this is my time. Maybe that's why I am here, to find what is lost and to restore what was. Maybe that's why we're all here." Well, I do think that's why we're all here. This is, going to be Celia's journey to restoration, as I say, but she is finding it through her art. And the letters to Peaches also end up being kind of letters to herself. I had been thinking a lot about something that, and I may not get the quote right because I didn't write it down tonight, but something that Flannery O'Connor said. She said, "I write because I don't know what I think until I read what I say." And I think there's something true in that. If you've ever journaled and you do it in a kind of, or perhaps you read The Artist's Way and you do morning pages, you know that sometimes you just don't know what you were thinking about until you write it down. That is very much true in my books. As I am writing them, I have no clue what they're about, really. I just write story. That's my first job as a novelist, is to entertain my audience. But as it turns out, once it's done, and when I finish a novel, it's like I'm looking at a Monet from right there. I just see color. I can't tell what it's about. I've got to back away before I get the bigger picture. And sure enough, probably a couple of months after I finished the book, all those themes start coming out and I see what was on my mind at the time. And that is going to be Celia's experience too. So I feel like I've been, So this store, you may all know, but this store has a shop cat named Nora, and I am in love. And Nora is like thinking about coming up on the table. I hope she does. It would make me so happy. I would love to chat with you and have any kinds of questions you might have, but I think also Jackie might have some questions. Please don't be shy. It's so much fun. We've got a small group tonight, and in some ways that can be really good because we can have, oh yeah, Zora Nell, the hub kitty. I hope so. Um, you know, we can have a real conversation about things, and I'm happy to be with you here for a while. So let's go.
Thank you so much, Marie. That was lovely, and thank you for sharing a little bit more about the book. And Zora Nell, of course, may just pop into the computer screen. I apologize in advance if she helps herself. Um, so if you have any questions, like Marie said, you can plug them into the chat window. You can actually also ask Marie. I think you can unmute and ask, and she'd be fine with that since we're a pretty small group. That's a benefit of that. So a couple questions. Well, firstly, I put Marie's website in the chat. Her blog is on her website, so you might want to check that out. I've heard it's wonderful. I also put the link to order a signed book, and I put the link to the Flannery O'Connor quote that she gave us. So if anybody wants to check that out and ask questions based on those, you're welcome to. Oh, there she is. So one thing I wanted to ask Marie was if you wrote this during the pandemic, and if so, did that inform any of the writing of the book, or did it just happen to coincide with the subject matter that we're dealing with right now?
I'm sorry, and you know, we've got a little bit of an echo. So I think what you said was I writing it during COVID, and did that to some degree inform the book? Is that right? Okay, good. I thought that's what I heard. I was also distracted by the cat, quite frankly. So in a good way. To some degree, yes, it did. I was writing some of this book, and as I said, I ended up putting I put a lot of myself into this book, perhaps more than I have in other books. In a lot of ways, Celia is not me. Celia is Celia, and yet, as a writer, you see your characters through the prism of your life and your own experience. So, in some sense, every novel is sort of autobiographical in that kind of a sense, and certainly there was some of that. One thing is Celia's father has passed away a long time ago. And during the writing of this book, my father died. And I had a very complicated relationship with my dad. I loved him and he loved me. Celia loved her dad and he loved her, but it was a complicated relationship. And when my dad died, of course, we couldn't, you know, we couldn't say goodbye really. I was with him when he died, and I felt very fortunate that I was there and that he did not have to be alone in that. But we still really haven't had a proper funeral. My dad's ashes are at home, and this summer I hope to be able to, I hope we are able to have waffles at the Moose Lodge because that was his favorite thing on earth, and we will scatter him in his favorite fishing lake. But we haven't been able to do that. And so writing this book gave me some closure that I needed to have. And in fact, I wrote the last chapter of the book 2 days after my dad had died. And that definitely influenced that to a great degree. I think, yes, in other ways, just there's some themes of isolation in the book. And I think that came through, isolation and what it does to people. And that certainly came through. One thing that was not so much COVID related necessarily, but there's a character in the book, Celia's best friend, Calvin LaGuardia. And if that sounds like a made up name, it's because it is. Calvin LaGuardia is one of those people who just invented himself one day. I love those people. I love the unusual people. I collect them. And this particular character is in fact modeled on my best friend, Mark. And the book is dedicated to him. And it was a joy to write those sections, particularly. Those were the easiest parts of the book for me to write. Now, Calvin is Calvin and Mark is Mark. They are different people. And yet there's There's a lot that comes through that I really enjoyed. For one thing, kind of the cadence of the conversations between Celia and Mark is very much, or Celia and Mark, oh dear, that was so Freudian. Between Celia and Calvin are really like it is when Mark and I talk. And so it made writing them very easy, and it made me happy because I love talking to him. So it was kind of fun to put that on paper. And then the other thing that came through is like, he is my dearest friend. I talk to him all the time about all kinds of things. And that friendship is just a joy. So in a lot of a sense, this book really is dedicated to him. It is an homage to our friendship, which I value very, very much.
Thank you so much, Marie. I was just going to ask about Calvin. Also, I love that you dedicated the book to Mark. Like I told Marie, I just started the book, and I saw the dedication. I was wondering who the mysterious Mark was. So I'm so happy that his name is in there. I muted you while I'm talking since we're in the same room, so hopefully that helps with the echo. But I will fix that before you go to talk again. I was going to ask another question since we don't have any questions from the audience yet. If you do have a question, please don't be shy. But I was going to ask what helped you blend the ideas of, if you had the idea about the advice columnist, and then you had the idea about the hoarder and the restoration of the house. So how did you come up with the idea to blend those into the same character, the same book experience? Combining those into the same book. Unmute yourself quick.
You know, honestly, I don't know. It just, I am a writer who writes her way into the book. I do always start with an outline. Well, my very first book, I didn't start with an outline because one of the beauties of being unpublished is nobody ever cares if you ever finish your book. So you can take forever. And there's a very good chance nobody ever will read your book. So it's fine. But ever since then, every book I've ever written has been purchased before I wrote it. And so editors want to have an outline so that you can prove to them that you actually do have an idea. But mine always changed so much. And so it's hard for me to go back. I usually I do about 6 to 8 rounds of revisions with each book, and things come on all the time. So I think actually the first thing I had was the hoarding was definitely a thing. But it was a very, very different book on my first go round. And it was actually a much darker book. And I decided, with the help of a writer friend of mine, that was just too sad. So I had to come up with something else. And I don't know, it just seemed like an advice columnist made sense to me. So, I love to have characters who have professions that I have fantasized about what it would be like to have that. So it's just my way of being able to vicariously do the things I probably am not going to be able to do.
Thank you, Marie. I love that you were able to answer that, even though it was kind of an off-the-wall question. I just really wanted to know how those characteristics came into being. I love that. You also mentioned a little bit about like an imposter syndrome that she has. Could you talk a little bit about how that came into being, or if that was based on experiences for you? Or I feel like that's a very relatable thing for a lot of people. I'm not sure why, and I'm curious as to how you came across that as part of your character.
It is something I have suffered from my entire life, is why. Like, since I was probably a teenager. When I was in school, I did quite well in school, and I got a lot of, accolades for people telling me that I was very intelligent, or I was this, or I was that. And I didn't feel like I was. I thought, well, I have fooled them, and at any second, they're going to figure out that I'm an idiot, and this will be that. And I think that is kind of, it's not necessarily a universal experience, but I do think a lot of people, especially if you have been accomplished in really any particular kind of area, you're always, and if you are a person who has an ambition, um, then you're going to always strive to do more. And I think that is, in fact, one of the most difficult things for me as a writer is if you finish a book you love, there's that sense of, well, that was very nice, Miss Bostwick, and what will you play for us next? How do you top the next thing? And I always have enormous moments of doubt when I'm writing a book, always. It's, when I get the idea, it's genius. I am a genius. I love that moment when the idea really sparks. But then, and I actually have gotten to the point where I call it Bostwick's rule of 180. When I get to about page 180 in my manuscript, I decide that I am a moron and the book is terrible and I should hit delete. And I have to call up my sister. This is an actual thing. I'm not being modest. I call up my sister who lives near Seattle. And for about 4 hours, she talks me out of hitting delete. And we have this Oriental rug in my house, and it's only worn on one side because, for reasons which are hard to explain, I choose to pace up and down just that one side on the phone, talking with her. And I'm like, no, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's going to ruin my career. This will be it. No one will want it. It's a terrible book. And she'll say, Marie, you always say this. And I'm like, I know, but this time it's true. It's serious. It feels really real to me. And so I have to get her to do that. So I think, I think a lot of us suffer from that kind of a sense that, you just don't, you may appear confident, but we just don't always feel confident. That was a long answer. I am not good at short answers. I've got to work on that.
I love that, Marie. That very carefully answered the question. And I did have I could relate to her with that, even though I had never thought about it really. So I love that you incorporated that. And thank you for, opening up about that, because that's a lot to being willing to talk about. We do have a question from an audience member. Carrie would like to ask you if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, how do you get from a character that is just a vague idea to a character that is sort of fleshed out?
It takes a long time, and it's part of why I do so many, so many revisions. The character grows each time. And I don't know that I am usual in this. I try to flesh the character out when I start, but I have to kind of let her talk, and I have to think, and I'm slow. I am not a fast writer by any means. So I put in a lot of hours every day. Things just come to me. It's hard to explain. And I know that's not a satisfying, answer. It's part of why I almost never teach writing, because I genuinely do not know exactly how I do what I do. So that wasn't a very good answer, is it? But it's a truthful one. I do try to, I usually start with a profession. And then as I go on, I definitely start spending time thinking about family background, because I think that so much forms our personality, our experience, our early experiences with our family. So, and then I try to think about, what does this person really love? Because that tells me a lot about them. Celia, and it came in later, but I realized one day, Celia loves Christmas movies. And she's obsessed with Christmas movies, and she watches them all the time. And her friend Calvin thinks this is just dumb. Why does she do that? And she says, because, it renews my hope in humanity and happy endings. And so I think that says a lot about Celia, that she is somebody she's looking for the hopeful stuff. She's trying very hard to look on the bright side, even when things aren't bright. And I find that rather endearing.
Wow, thanks.
That was a good question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that, actually, precisely.
Carrie. That was a great question. If that answers yours, Leanne has a question, if that's okay. Go
Hello.
ahead.
Hi, Marie. I was just wondering when you decided to be a writer, like, is it something that you've always wanted, or you just one day you just started writing?
Well, I'm going to try and do I can actually tell this story and it could take an hour. So I'm going to try and do the short version of it. The thing is, I have written for as long as I can remember. The very first thing I remember writing, I know I was not 6 years old. So I was trying to write essentially what we would have called a screenplay I had been listening to the album of the musical Camelot, but I hadn't seen the movie. So I was trying to write a story to make the songs work. So that was the first thing. So I always wrote, and I wrote to entertain myself. I wrote poetry, I wrote stories, I wrote all through school. If you had put me in a cardboard box with no stimulation, but you gave me a piece of paper and a pencil, I would have written. I didn't try to publish anything. I honestly did not think about being a writer. I don't know why. I think I was not a very confident child, and I thought writers had more education than I did or came from better circumstances than I did. I just thought they were different people, better people somehow. But when I was in my early 30s and I had 3 kids by this time, I ended up going through a strange, again, I can do an hour on this at a luncheon speech. Come to my luncheon speech sometime. It's a great story. So, but through a strange series of circumstances, I ended up in a writer's workshop that I sort of just wandered into while I was on a vacation. And I was a little scared and I almost left, but I just decided I would give it a day and see if I liked it. And so I ended up staying, but I didn't read out loud because I just wouldn't have done that. But about the 4th day, everybody's reading their stuff and I hadn't. And I was reading mine, I'm listening to theirs, and I was thinking theirs were good, but I was thinking, well, mine's not terrible, I don't think. So I raised my hand and the facilitator called on me and, asked me to read. And I did. And I read a couple more times during the rest of that week. And on the last day, the facilitator pulled me aside and asked me what I had published, which was a big shock. So I was living in Mexico at that time. I had just moved there with my family. I had just given birth to a 3rd child. And so this man was like, well, you're a writer, you've got to hone your craft, which I didn't even know what that meant. And he's like, you've got to go to writers' workshops and you've got to go to graduate school. And I was like, well, yeah, but I live in the 3rd world and I'm breastfeeding. So I don't think that's going to happen, but thanks. And he kept pushing me, you got to do this, you got to do that. Well, it wasn't going to work with my lifestyle as a mother of 3 living in a foreign country. And so he finally said, well, I guess I will just have to teach you. And so that man was the director of the graduate writing program at Colorado State University. And for 3 years, he became my teacher. And we essentially did it was like a correspondence course. And this was way before the interwebs, And so I actually would mail him short stories and he would mark them up and mail them back. And that's kind of how I learned to write. And after 3 years of this, I kind of had learned what I could learn in that type of situation. I had a short story that got longer and longer, and I ended up spending 4 years on it. And that was my first novel, Fields of Gold. So it wasn't that it just, I don't know that I ever made the decision. All that happened to me was like a door opened and I walked through it. And then I walked through the next door and the next door and the next door. And now here I am all this time later.
Yeah, I can understand that. Sometimes, I think things like that happen quite often. And quilting, because I'm a quilter, I just wondered how long you've been quilting. And
forever.
Right.
It feels like forever. I actually started quilting in my early 20s as a means of getting away from my children. I love my children, but I needed something for me, and it turned out to be quilting. And I had grown up doing garment sewing, so it wasn't a big stretch to to move to quilting, and I still love it. But again, I never met a fiber art I did not love.
Yeah. Well, then when you were talking about your writing, that's kind of how I felt about quilting, because if you had said that 20 years ago, I would have gone, I would never
Right.
do quilting. But yeah, now it's just an obsession. So
Yes, it is.
cool.
And it's a
Yeah.
wonderful, and what I love about it is like, this is art that you can use.
Yeah.
And I think there's something so powerful about that. It's like art that we incorporate into our everyday lives. We sleep in it. We put table runners on our table. We make our homes more beautiful. And I just love that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Anne. Those are great questions. And Carrie, that was lovely. If anyone else has any questions for Marie, just do what you did earlier. That was perfect. Type in the chat window the chat question, and I'll pause and let Marie answer that for you. I also just wanted to ask a little bit, Marie, how long did you work on this novel? Since you were talking about, you said you wrote slowly, I think is one of the things you said. How long did it take you?
This one, I spent a lot more time on it than I have in the past. As I said, this is my 19th novel. My first book came out in 2005. And that's another part, I talked about Celia kind of putting a lot of myself into it. After writing, 18 books in 13 years, which I know doesn't sound like, oh, I said I'm slow, and if you don't write, you'll think, no, that's really fast. But honestly, it's not compared to a lot of people in commercial fiction. And 3 of those books were novellas, which still take a lot of time. But I have to put in a lot of hours to make up for the fact that I am not as fast as a lot of other people. So the truth is, I was just really tired. And I kind of felt like my creative well had run dry. And so I had made arrangements, like my agent and I had started talking about this a long time before, that I needed a break. I really needed some time to just kind of refill my cup. And so that's what I did. We had decided that I would not write for a whole year. And I started playing with my fabric. I was quilting more. I was playing the piano. I was knitting. I was running. I was going to museums. I was reading more, all of those things. But the funny thing happened after about 3 months or so. My agent called me up and she said, "So, are you writing?" And it turned out that I was. But I needed to do that. I needed that time. And so I actually had like almost 2 years with Celia, which is not, something I had for a long time. So it was really good. And it was, so I kind of got back to that restorative part of me too, where I could love writing again. Now, let me be clear. This was a really hard book to write. I always get annoyed with my writer friends when they'll say, "Oh, this book just wrote itself." I've never had that book. I keep waiting for that to happen. It never happens with me. I have to work very, very hard at it. But it was nice to have extra time and to really let the story kind of bloom in a more organic way. So I loved that.
Thanks, Marie. Leanne has another question, wondering, since we're talking about writing, do you already have another book in mind, or are you kind of taking another break?
I do have another book, and in fact, it's almost done. It's a little late. I was supposed to turn it in on March 1st, and that just didn't happen. It was a difficult year in a lot of ways. So for that too, but as soon as I finish with this book tour, I am going to go home and finish it. It is called Esme Cahill Fails Spectacularly, and it'll be out sometime next year. I do still have to finish it. And I'm actually really excited about that one. I kind of already went through the self-doubt with it. So I've sort of worked through that. That's really good. I've rewritten it about 14 times, it feels like. Not maybe 14. That's hyperbole, but a lot. And I've actually moved the setting entirely. And so I've been doing a lot of driving on this book tour, and that's really good because it's given me some thoughts about my characters. So, Carrie was asking before, I don't always know how it's going to, suddenly I'll be driving along and I'll think, oh, that's what she had this thing happen in her past. And and sometimes I'll dash off a couple of notes about that. But usually if it's really good, I remember.
Another question about this book that I had was if you had to do any research for it, because it's a little bit about like the mindset of maybe a hoarder and like how you go through the adoption process, and then like the advice columnist thing. What kind of research did it require? Did it just come from?
Oh, well, the hoarder thing actually ended up, I did quite a lot of research for that. It started because I had just read this one nonfiction book and I was kind of fascinated by it. And so by the time I was done, I ended up reading 3 or 4 at least. It might have even been more. So I was really interested in that. The advice columnist stuff, I've been reading advice columnists forever. So that was pretty easy for me to do. But I definitely wanted Celia to have a particular style that is perhaps more vulnerable and more personable than many advice columnists. She is unusual in that she is willing to kind of open up her own experience when she's writing back to people. And there's a thing in the book where she and her friend Calvin, and this plays into, they do something they call trading hostages. And this is the idea that and Calvin came up with it. And I actually stole this from Stephen Sondheim. It was in a musical. I wish I'd thought of it, but I just, they say good writers like invent and great writers steal. So this was Stephen's. It was brilliant. And the idea is, Calvin said the best way to get to know somebody really well, really quickly is you tell them something about yourself that you wouldn't want everybody to know. And then the other person does the same. So essentially you trade hostages, right? Well, Celia kind of does that in her writing. And I think that's why her readers trust her so much, because she's willing to be vulnerable in front of them. And so that made her a particular kind of advice columnist that I really like. That's rare.
I haven't read a lot of advice columnists, and now I want to, like, talking to you about it makes me want to just like find out the kinds of things that people like to talk about and ask questions about on these columns. And I imagine it's kind of like a correspondence where if you're asking a question and they respond, you start to feel connected with them.
Do me a short version of it. I'm so sorry. I'm still getting that echo.
When you ask an advice columnist a question and they respond, is it normal to kind of form an emotional connection to the person?
Oh, I do think there is a personal connection. And, to some degree, that also comes out of my experience. So I've had many careers in my life, and one of them was I worked in pastoral ministry to women. So I have heard a lot of people's stories, and I have given a lot of advice, although mostly my job was to listen more than anything else, because very often people really know what they need to do. They just need to talk it out. Especially I find that's true of women. But I have always been that person who people tell me their stuff. I don't know why. I've always been that way. Maybe it is because I'm a pretty good listener. And so that certainly comes into it as well. But yeah, you do get a kind of a personal connection with those people. And, as an author, a lot of people write to me and tell me their stories too. I'm always honored and amazed and touched by how people will connect with the book in a really real way, and then be willing to tell me about what's going on with them. So in a lot of ways, even though I'm not in pastoral ministry to women in an official capacity anymore, I still am.
That's actually what I was going to ask you next. I love that you went straight there. Is like the connection with an author and your audience, which we're doing a little bit of now. I've seen that same kind of thing happen where you just feel like you can talk to them because you've read something that they've written and it makes you feel connected. So I'm glad that you still get to experience that, even though this was a theoretical, because you said that your characters have a career that you've thought of about or dreamed about doing before. So I love that you still get that aspect of it.
Yeah.
I saw a couple people like mute and unmute themselves during, I think Marion maybe. If anyone has a question, feel free to just type in that you have a question or raise your hand. I'll make sure I don't miss anybody.
Yeah.
I don't have any more questions popping up right now. Is there anything you wanted to, oh, Leanne, go ahead.
Sorry, I've just got one more. When you said that you already had your next book in that's almost finished, so how long does it take from when you submit your final to when it actually gets
When you
published?
get a book, it takes
Yeah.
about a year. It's about a year. So there's a great deal of work that has to be done after, I turn it in. I mean, the first thing is it goes off to my editor who reads it and gives me her comments. And then I do a round of revisions. And then hopefully only one, but it can be more than one. And sometimes those are quick and sometimes it can take weeks. So there's that. Then you have what we all kind of agree, okay, this is the final version, and it goes off to copy editing, and there's a couple of rounds of that kind of editing as well. And so then once you've got a book, there's a lot of the marketing things that have to be done. You have to have covers, you have to create what we call advanced reading copies and get those out to reviewers or people you want to perhaps do a recommendation for the book. So there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on, and really it's a team effort. It truly, truly is. And I have loved working with this new team at William Morrow. They've been great.
It's just, yeah, when you said that you already had almost another one finished and you just do it, and I'm thinking, oh, it's quick. But
no, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen. So normally the whole process, Jean, from when I start to when you have it in your hands is about 2 years, best case.
Thank you, Anne. I was just showing you guys I have one of those advanced copies
Yes.
that has like an uncorrected proof that they send to bookstores so that we can read the books, so that when they come out, we can start talking about them like we're doing today. So that's a really great thing that booksellers, of course, love to have. We don't have any more questions at the moment. Is there anything that you wanted to finish with talking about, Marie?
Well, I want to thank you for being here. I do want to urge you to get the book from Hub City. Having a local bookstore is such a great privilege and blessing, really, because I don't know about you, but I don't know what the book is I can't live without until I get to go to my local bookstore and see what's there. So it's really important that we support them. So I hope you'll consider getting Celia from them. And if some of you are my readers who are living in other places, I am going to sign some extra books here. And guess what? Hub City will ship them to you anywhere in America. I also want to remind you that signed books make incredible gifts. So even if you have already read Celia's story, it'd be a great birthday gift for somebody you like. There it is. Whoop, I just turned off. I have a blank screen. I don't know. I went away. Oh, here we are. Okay, we're back. I also want, the other thing too, Mother's Day is coming up. So Celia would be a great Mother's Day gift or a birthday gift. So I hope you will consider doing that. And I thank you. This has been great. Jackie, thanks so much. And thank all of you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Marie. You've been absolutely wonderful and super fun to talk to and answering questions so honestly and openly. I really appreciate that. I know the audience does too. Leanne, I am so sorry you're in Australia. We can ship to Australia. It's just very expensive. So if you really want a signed book, just call the shop and I'll figure out how to get you one. We have shipped out of the country before. We just have to charge extra for shipping. So anyway, it's a beautiful book, and hopefully you'll be able to have access to a signed copy there in your country. And I'm so happy that you zoomed in all the way from there. And we just wanted to say thank you to Marie for taking the time to come out with us and visit the actual shop while she's in town. That was so exciting to actually get to meet her. I've been doing these virtual events for almost a year, and I've only got to meet 2 authors, so this is just so exciting for me. And also, we do have these lovely signed books, so I hope everyone will check them out. I think that's all for tonight. Are you all set, Marie?
I'm good. So thank you,
All right.
everybody.
Well, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll say good night for now, and hope you'll join us next time.
Thank you
Good
so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you. Bye.